Pastor Stephen Smith. I'm with Christian Leadership Partners. We provide leadership solutions for both profit and nonprofit organizations through coaching, teaching, and mentoring. Why not take a look at our website and see if there are some tools that you could use there that might make your organization more successful and possibly the leaders underneath you more effective. What we're doing is we're providing you with a free 30-day training program for your leaders. Now, these leadership training programs are based off of the Bible, and we're taking a look at the kings of Israel. Now, there's several kings that we can look at, and yesterday we looked at 4 different kings and how they all failed up in the nation of Israel. Now, remember, Judah's down in the south, and they've been fighting against each other since the days of Solomon. So there have been several leaders between each of these, and what we want to do is we want to take a look at King Ahab today. Well, why would we look at King Ahab? Well, what we can do is we can find 3 different things that will actually help us to see how we can become better leaders. Now, the first thing is that this is going to give a picture of what good leadership looks like and what bad leadership also looks like. So if I can identify those different attributes and those different skills that I know that I can improve on, then I don't have to be a bad leader. I can be a good leader. The second thing that this does is it gives us a historical record of the successes and failures of these kings. So I can look at King Ahab, for example, and I can see the decisions that he made and how they didn't pay off for him, and how he reacted to different prophecies, and how he was given 3 different chances to make a difference in his life and to change the nation around, and yet he never did. So we want to be able to make sure that we can identify these things in our lives so that we can not make the same mistakes that he made. And the third thing is that all of these leadership lessons are going to point towards Jesus Christ himself. We want to see him as our ultimate leader. He developed this leadership concept that Robert Greenleaf penned called servant leadership. And what it does is it gives us a picture of how servant leaders are more effective. How if we're serving the team and if we're serving the organization, then those things together actually make us stronger leaders and we're more effective as leaders. So a lot of us want to get the glory, and a lot of us want that nameplate or that name tag or that parking space, or we want to get that big pat on the back. Whatever it is, we want to make sure that we're getting those things, and yet that isn't servant leadership. Now, servant leadership is identified by a pyramid, and we'll talk a lot about that in future studies, but at the top is you, and at the bottom are all the people underneath you that support you, and that's the mission itself. But if we take that pyramid and turn it upside down, now all of a sudden we're going to be a lot more successful, and the people that are lowest in the totem pole are actually at the top, and we're helping them to become better leaders, and the organization will become better because of that. And that's what servant leadership is basically all about. So let's take a look at King Ahab and see how he failed in the things that he could have done properly. This is 1 Kings 16:30-31, and it says, "But Ahab, son of Omri, did what was evil in the Lord's sight, even more than any of the kings before him. And as though it were not enough to follow the example of Jeroboam, he married Jezebel, the daughter of King Ethbaal of the Sidonians, and began to bow down and worship Baal." So one of the things that Ahab did that was worse than everybody else, he was doing what others had done before him, and in fact, he was trying to outdo them in the evil that was a part of that. What are we doing as leaders? Are we staying focused on what we've been called to do, or are we doing the bad things that others ahead of us have done? Are we following the same example or maybe the same habits that we've done all of our lives that are actually preventing us from becoming better leaders? Here's the other part of this part. If we take a look at this verse, it also tells us that he was influenced heavily by Baal. Queen Jezebel actually turned him towards the worship of Baal, and that made things even worse. And he listened to everything that she said, and in fact, he even let her rule the kingdom. Who are the people underneath you that are trying to rule your team rather than you? What you want to do is you want to identify how you're going to get them into line, or how you're going to use their strengths towards the team, and then remove those weaknesses and make sure that they don't try and overthrow you or to tell you what to do as a leader. Remember, as a servant leader, it doesn't mean that you're bowing down and allowing somebody else to do these things. What you're doing is you're taking their suggestions, and if they're good, then you use them. If they're bad, then we don't follow them. It's your decision as a leader to make the right one, and you want to make sure that you do that. Here, King Ahab didn't do that. 2 Chronicles 18:3, we can see this, where all of a sudden he links up with the king of Judah. They'd been fighting all along, but now we see King Jehoshaphat coming up from Judah, and we'll talk a lot more about him in the next couple of days. But Jehoshaphat comes up, and he starts working with Ahab. They even get to the point where their kids actually get married. They're trying to reunite the kingdom through marriage rather than through battles and wars. And in fact, it's amazing because now we see Jehoshaphat, son of Asa, who had hired the Sidonians and the Syrians to come down and attack Israel. Now they're fighting against them together. It's kind of interesting that you would see that. But getting back to Ahab, he has all these different issues. And in fact, now all of a sudden he goes to Elijah, who is a prophet that came out and spoke against him. He came up to him and he said, look, we defeated the prophets of Baal over on Mount Carmel. You had this opportunity to be able to repent, and he didn't do that. And in fact, he allowed his wife to influence him there. 1 Kings 18:18 says, I've made no trouble for Israel, Elijah replied. You and your family are the troublemakers, for you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord and have worshipped the images of Baal instead. So Elijah's reading him the riot act. He's given this opportunity to turn and to take this kingdom, this nation, back towards the God who created them and brought them in there, and yet Ahab refused. So we also see that Ahab was actually a pretty weak leader. He wanted things for his own benefit. In fact, there's this guy Nabal that had this vineyard right next to his farm, and he wanted the vineyard, but Nabal wouldn't sell it. So we find that Jezebel goes in and she has her own plan. Look at what 1 Kings 21:6-7 says. I asked Naboth to sell me his vineyard or trade it, but he refused, Ahab told her. Are you the king of Israel or not? Jezebel demanded. Get up and eat something and don't worry about it. I'll get you Naboth's vineyard. So he let people do the things. He delegated not only his authority, but also his responsibility to Jezebel. And we can't do that to our subordinate leaders. Or we can delegate the authority, but we can't delegate the responsibility. We're still responsible for the things that we do. And in fact, this was held against Ahab, not against Jezebel. Although Jezebel gets her own reward later on if you read on into Kings. 1 Kings 21:22 says this, and this is God's warning against Ahab. He finally comes to him and says, look, this is what you need to do. 1 Kings 21:22 tells us this. I'm going to destroy your family as I did the family of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and the family of Baasha, son of Ahijah. For you have made me very angry and have led Israel into sin. So we see that God's reading Ahab the riot act here. And finally we see that King Ahab actually gets a bit of common sense and he humbles himself before the Lord. A lot of times we as leaders won't humble ourselves or say, you know what, I made a mistake here, or you know what, I was wrong. Hey, I need my team to come back together. We need to reestablish this covenant. We need to reestablish rules and regulations that are going to keep us in line with what the organization wants to accomplish. And so Ahab does this, and God actually extends the length of his kingdom, if you can imagine that. This is 1 Kings 21:29. It says, do you see how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has done this, I will not do what I promised during his lifetime. It will happen to his sons. I will destroy his dynasty. So even though Ahab's dynasty is going to be destroyed, it was put on hold because he stopped and he repented. This was the evil king that had done things far worse than anyone else, and yet God still gave him this opportunity. The third time for him was the charm. He had 3 opportunities to be able to turn back to God and repent, and finally he did it at the very end, saving the remainder of his kingdom until at least his sons got there so that they could ruin it, I guess. So let's take a look at King Ahab's successes. He called on prophets of the Lord when he needed to know something. He sought after God even though he was worshiping Baal. He made alliances with Judah, so he found out the people who could make him strong, and he made alliances with them. He was a little bit sneaky in that aspect. He also repented at the end, and we know that that's an important part of what we want to do as leaders. Now, he had several failures as well. I mean, he was the worst king of them all, right? He allowed his wife to rule the country rather than him. He allowed others to do that. He was worse than any of the others before him, and he was given 3 opportunities to repent, but waited until the very end to do that. Imagine if he had done that at the beginning, how he could have been such a better king. So we want to ask ourselves again, these two extra questions. These questions are going to help develop us as leaders. I encourage you to download the notes below, or you can also write this down on a piece of paper. But if you're journaling, I really do think that that'll help make a difference in you. So who's leading your teams? You've got to make a list of these people who are leading your teams. Are they subordinate leaders or are they trying to take over? Where are they in aspect to what they think of you as a leader. Are they trying to tell you what to do? Are they making suggestions? What type of leadership are you exhibiting that's allowing them to become better, but not to take your position until it's time for that to happen? The second question that we want to ask ourselves are, what are some of the ways that you can establish your leadership over your team? Now, there's certain things that we can do to become better leaders. We want to make sure that we're doing those things, and if you can make that list, then it's going to help you to become that better leader that you know that you can be. So why not subscribe or share these videos with others? I know that they'll make a difference not only in your life, but in the lives of those who actually take a look at them. Well, God bless you, and I hope that you can become the leader that you're destined to be.